Hello, and welcome to the Physio Insights podcast. I'm Kurt Shooter, co-founder of RunEasy. At RunEasy, we're building running gait software designed to help rehab professionals better understand their patients and athletes so that they can make smarter, data-informed decisions in their care. Along the way, we sit down with thought leaders from around the world to explore expert perspectives and evidence-based insights. Our goal? To give you the tools, insights, and reasoning you need to elevate your clinical practice and empower your athletes. This is the Physio Insights podcast. Today we're joined by Joachim Boon, a leading Belgian sports physiotherapist who blends evidence-based sports rehab with elite performance science. He helps athletes from runners to basketball players recover smarter, move better, and gain that performance edge. Joachim, thank you so much for joining us today on the pod. Thanks for carving out some time from the practice. Really appreciate it. What led you to becoming a sports physio? What's driving your purpose?
Well, I think my own experience with injuries. So during my teenage years, I played soccer or football for you guys, and I had a lot of hamstring issues every season, couple of them. So I had some physio sessions myself, and it triggered me to be one of physio by myself. Also for the exercise parts, did a lot of exercises. So I was immediately triggered by the human body and how it recovers quite quickly. But again, for the other injuries coming again and again and again, it keeps bothering me and I want to know more. And that was for me personally, one of the big triggers. So personal experience with some nasty injuries.
Yeah, it seems to be quite a common thread amongst sports physios is personal experience and having to literally go through the same pain. When you say recurring injuries, what do you mean by that? A specific type of injuries or?
Yeah, mostly hamstring injuries. I think from my 16 years old, something like that, 16, 17, I had at least 2 or 3 hamstring or calf injuries in one season. And it was left to right, right to left, so it shifted all the time. And back then, you just do your thing. You were also all the times physio-wise. So you did some exercises, but mostly you had some rest. So you just listen to the doctors, you listen to your physio, you listen to your own body, and then you think, okay, I'm not in pain anymore. So you go back to training. It all starts well, and then after some weeks, you had some soreness. You think, it's okay, just keep pushing, and then you do one sprint, and then it popped again and again and again and again. So it's one of the reasons I stopped playing. I think it was not only that, also my studies came into place, but it's really like the effort going to rehab and back again and back again. So it was one of the things. Hamstrings are my weakest part, not anymore, but it was, and that's why maybe hamstrings are one of my favorite muscles to rehab as well, because of the personal experience, but mostly that. So no ACL or operations for me. It's mostly the hamstring strain injuries.
Yep. And then I'm assuming more from the sprinting type of behavior.
It was really quick. I was playing on the flank, so really going for the long and deep passes. I'm not that big, so quick and agile. Played against some older players from my 17, 18s on. I played with the first team. So big guys for me. So it was always sprinting and then have to avoid a tackle or something like that. Up and on, all the time. So mostly sprinting indeed.
So help me understand a bit and help the listeners understand how do you go from that curiosity and that personal experience to jumping into physiotherapy and studying movement science?
Well, during the studies, I just go with the flow. It was until my internships that I had a real hands-on experience what it meant to work with athletes and for them soccer players. And when I started working here with basketball players, it really triggered me. One of the internships I had was working with some professional athletes. I went on a training week abroad with some track and field athletes, and there I saw how they do pre-rehab, how they do proper rehab, how load management is setting into place. So it really triggered me that the intensity had to be high enough to get not only to the point before where you were before your injury, but getting even better. And that's maintaining strength and conditioning in season, even in the absence of injuries, quite important. And it doesn't matter if you are a recreational athlete or a professional athlete. That's an advantage for both. It's mainly the time you have for the time you want to invest in it. That's another thing, but it's important to get into shape and to get your particular muscles, depending on your injury history, to get there, really to focus on. So it's really the internships that triggered me. And from then on, trying to build my own level of expertise, my own level of interest, and it keeps evolving. The longer I work, the more experience I get, but also the more questions I ask myself. So it's an ongoing process.
Yeah, I can recognize that. I think even going back to the first time I met you, in the clinical practice as well, I could immediately see that you were drawn to that curiosity and being triggered by, digging into the research, digging into the evidence base, looking for what options there are, and that mindset, that it seemed to be is just continue asking more questions to help get the answers, of course, but keep digging and evolving. And from that perspective, what would you say is like, if you go back to when you're doing your internship to today, if you could kind of compare, the Joachim back then to now, what would you say, how would you say your views have evolved over time or been shaped? And maybe what are the biggest influences on that evolution?
Less is more. Let's summarize that. So in the beginning, when you were asked to come up with a workout and with some exercises for that particular type of patients with that problem, you always want to impress. Maybe to try to find like some really nice triggering exercises, but it's really important that if you want to work on local load bearing capacity, the capacity of particular muscles, then you have to know your biomechanics. You have to know how the leverage arms are working, especially with hamstrings. If I may take that example, because I'm articular in nature. So you have to know, which of the hamstrings is biased for more hip dominant versus knee dominant exercises. And they don't need to be complex. So if you want to train the medial hamstrings, then a leg curl is a really fantastic exercise. If you want to go more biceps femoris or the lateral hamstrings, then try to find some hip dominant like RDLs or stuff like that. So it doesn't need to be fancy or whatever. They really need to feel the muscles working and then embracing the complexity. So you have less is more, so you work on the local capacity, but it's always in complex interaction with other muscles. So try to incorporate that, but also know your limits, knowing that what you do in the gym, what you do during rehab, it has to have a transfer to training. But if you want to work really sport specific, then see how you can get your athlete or patient back on the field, back on the pitch as soon as possible, safely as soon as possible, so that they get high intensity efforts in which you monitor the volume. So for me personally, that is the biggest change. So based on biomechanics, knowing your biomechanics really well, know, what do I need to do to get them to the pitch as soon as possible? And that's where they work specifically on their sport-specific capacity. So for me, working on the local capacity is of primary importance in the acute phase. And then you get like the gray zone in which you have to introduce sport-specific capacity as well. And when you work in a professional setting, you have maybe a strength and conditioning coach, or you're communicating with the head coach or the trainer if you're working with track and field athletes, and then you just have to benchmark that you can do with the volume. You ask the coach themselves, what do you think? Because you have a lot more experience regarding load management in their particular fields. And you listen to them and you say, I've done this and that, they can do this and that. And then you communicate. And if you have a recreational athlete in which you don't have all the settings, or you have like a coach who is maybe not that experienced, then you have to take it in your hands and know, I don't let you train before you sprint. Once again, when you have hamstring or calf muscles, from literature that you can't do any exercises that even come close to the level of activity when you go for high intensity sprinting. So if you don't let them sprint, you're missing a really important piece of the puzzle. And if you're not sure they can sprint, don't let them train. and see that you have clear benchmarks. So that's maybe another point. Less is more, embrace complexity over time and have your benchmarks in place. So test, retest, and don't be shy. Don't be too hard to yourself. If they don't meet the benchmarks, you just need more time. It doesn't mean that you're doing something wrong per se, but try to map it out, try to be sure about yourself, and let that patient or the athlete feel that you're confident in what you're doing. And sometimes it just needs some more time. Some athletes recover quickly, some others don't. But it's really to do like a criteria based rehab, so that you depend on the criteria, meeting your criteria, not really the time. So taking the time from the injury is for me like something to keep track on. But if they meet the criteria, that's for me more important than the timeline. Timeline, you need to know your biological healing process, etc. But if they hit the criteria, you can take next steps. That's basically how I work. And that's the biggest difference from the beginning, because you're all stressing out. My exercises need to be fancy. My exercises need to be never seen before. No, basically, if you have no material, you can do proper rehab. For me personally, that's not true case. It's black and white story. But if you have no stretch bands, no fancy equipment, you can still do a lot of stuff that can help your athlete. So it doesn't need to be fancy, or it needs to be spot on, but not complex per se, or complicated. Let's say that.
Yeah, that resonates with me a lot. I remember when I was doing my internship, in fact, and it was linked to the university back in Stellenbosch in South Africa. Mm-hmm. And downstairs was the clinical practice where we did the internship, and upstairs was where we were doing the master's research. And we also had a journal club where once a week we would, someone would present the latest, paper or two papers where, there was exercise prescription for certain rehabilitation or return to sport. And I can remember how, how excited we were, starry-eyed we were when a new exercise was kind of discovered or in some way validated. And, immediately we just wanted to plug it into the next athlete that came through the door. Super inspired to do it, trying to force it in there. It sounds all fancy, but very quickly realizing, there's definitely a lot more context, and there's a process about when and how to interject these new exercises that come through the literature. So I'm actually curious, what do you have a specific process or framework that you use to know, like personally or based on other frameworks that you use to know when and how to implement a new exercise that comes about in the literature?
Yeah, I think there are more. It's a combination of different frameworks and personal experience. But for me, like a really nice template is from Matt Tabernier, I think, called From Control to Chaos Continuum. So it maps out like a general framework in which you start with like really controllable exercises, more focusing maybe on the local capacity of certain areas of the injuries. It can be like for ACL or a hamstring, particular muscle group or joints. And then based on the criteria, from literature, like strength, I need to have that for maximal strength. I need from that much for capacity. Motor control has to be this or that. Then you can take the next step, go to the next phase, and introducing more the complexity, more chaotic environment. And I'm not per se meaning that you have, for example, you do an RDL and more chaos, meaning that now we're doing RDL on the foam pad. That's not chaos for me. Chaos for me is introducing higher intensity stuff, single leg stuff, for example, or doing more reactive stuff. That's the more introducing chaotic environment for me. And then you can work with some cues, with cognitive task, dual tasking. That's really the chaos. And then once they have met some criteria from a strength-based perspective, from a capacity-based perspective, from a motor control-based perspective, then they can going back to the pitch, and a form of chaos is then taking place on the pitch and not anymore in the gym. But you continue doing like the local capacity stuff, because it's not linear. For me, nothing is linear. It's like overlapping all the time, and embracing that overlap, embracing that complexity is something you have to let it go. And you have to embrace it, because it's complex. It's not complicated per se, but it can be very overwhelming, because it's finding like the sweet spot. And it's maybe that's like the fine line or the gray zone between what the science says and what is the art. So you have to, it's like the feeling you have, okay, I have my benchmark, so I'm really, really clear about that. Then you have, then you have the stuff where you're looking at your patients and see, okay, how are you feeling? So basically when you're feeling that you're not there yet, just ask your patient, how do you feel? Do you feel ready going back on the pitch to introduce, like, for example, ACL? You have all the strength capacity, and then you say, okay, let's start jumping or start running. And that's something like I didn't do one for like 5 months, maybe if you recall, pre-injury months as well, of pre-operative period as well. So it can be very overwhelming. And the criteria, the objective criteria helps to give them confidence. But there's in literature that stated also that the mental preparedness to go back on the pitch is really one of the biggest criteria that is a risk factor for re-injury. Yeah. So if you not taking that into account, and it can be a simple question, how do you feel? Do you feel ready to jump again? Do you feel ready to run again? And I take the example of an ACL, but it's the same for any muscle injury, muscle strain injury as well. So they have to be confident. And if they're not confident, then you just continue to try to adapt some exercises to get smaller steps. And that's where it gets really, really interesting for, how can I do that? And there's no clear answer in that. It's just, okay, let's see if we find some intermediate steps to give you more confidence in it. We were talking about frameworks, so a little bit offside, but for me, the control to chaos continuum is a big framework to map it out. And then you start, okay, where do I want to end? And then you do like reverse engineering. So you need to know, once again, the biomechanics, what's the load they have to endure when they go to full practice, full competition again. And then you map it out, what do I need to have to endure that loads. And then it will be strength, capacity, motor control once again, but also conditioning. So I start really early by reintroducing conditioning stuff. If they can run, then it will be stuff on the bike, stuff on the air bike, maybe stuff on, if you have like a ski erg kind of stuff, you can do it as well. Some upper body conditioning to get them sweat again as early as possible. So that's one of the things for me was really, really important to introduce, because I saw that it was like, it gets some relief. So at the beginning, you're only busy with like the mechanics, strength stuff, etc., etc. But it's really repetitive in nature. And sometimes I just need to raise their heartbeat a little bit. So I have a patient right now who is like a really good cyclist, not professional, but really, he was really close to that. And he was just, we introduced some kind of conditioning, and he was like, okay, finally I get some, like the point I was really feeling the pain, the good pain, because going really deep, it felt so nice because it was really a long time ago. And that's basically, if you can reintroduce that quite early, they are still rehabbing, but also have the feeling they're training again. So besides going step by step to get them where they have to be, introducing conditioning stuff, upper body, lower body, impact, non-impact, as soon as possible, gave them the feeling they're working on their body once again, and they're not too restricted by their injury or their post-op restrictions, for say. So that's another thing. Try to reintroduce conditioning as soon as possible, and that will be it for the control to chaos. The conditioning stuff, I read a lot of papers of Bushite, I think.
Martin Bushite, yeah.
Yeah, so it's like, for me, the golden standards regarding conditioning and reconditioning. For me, that are the guidelines I follow, more or less. And then based on this particular injury, there's also a flow for groin injuries from Enda King, which I quite like. It follows more or less the same line of thinking from Matt Tavernier in the control to chaos theory, but then applied to groin injuries. And then regarding hamstring injuries, it's, for me, Mandy Gucha. There's also a nice multifactorial framework. But once again, for me, it comes back to, you work on local capacity, you have the global capacity, you have taking into account, but see that you have like a nice compromise between the two. So not focusing to the local capacity, but you lose something, but not going too fast to the sport specific or general capacity, because that's also a pitfall as well. And I think going too early fancy with your exercises and just overlooking the basic stuff, building capacity and strength is for me one of the biggest pitfalls. And that's why framework is a nice guideline, a nice hold on for yourself to not losing it. So yeah, in a nutshell.
No, awesome. I can relate to that as well. And if you think about from the control to the chaos continuum, or from the local specific training all the way through to the global dynamic, I'm sure at some stages or phases of that continuum, you probably, not just from a training perspective, you want to have assessment criteria as well. I'm curious to know, what assessment criteria do you have at certain phase, and how do you introduce objective? You mentioned subjective criteria a bit with literally asking them how do they feel. What other criteria do you use?
Well, I think to get we trust strength, so maximal strength. We have for capacity, so how long can they repeat some exercise. We have motor control, in which you can do more like a qualitative analysis. For example, single leg squats you can use as an example. We have conditioning stuff as well. That's more for taking a baseline basically of what can I do and then to build on. But for example, strength testing, to take an ACL as an example, or a hamstring, maybe we test the calf muscles. So one of the first post-op testings that you do for an ACL is more or less around the 3 months, 4 months post-op. And then we do general strength testing if you have an isokinetic machine or you can have access to it. Then we go from there. And that's to be the baseline. But if you have a handheld anemometer, you can do strength assessments quite easily as well. And one of the things is, to really get into the strength training, or for the jumping of the running, you have to 70% limb symmetry index for at least that. For the calf muscles, for example, we're aiming at 1.5 or 2.0 times body weight for maximal isometric strength. For the glutes, there is a good benchmark is, I think it was 35% of body weight in the side lying position and then holding it. And then it's more like a break test you do, in which the basics. So you do a raise above horizontal and then you go around the ankle and you push down, and 35% body weight is quite good benchmark to hit. Work capacity for the hamstrings, for example, single leg glute bridge is one we use. And then we use a metronome, in which you have to do on a box from 60 centimeters in a knee flexion of 130, 135 degrees. So really quite extended. Single leg glute bridges 15, 20 times at least, with a metronome going to 60 beats per minute. So really up, down, up, down, up, down. Then you just look what happens. And same principle we use for the single leg heel raise to test capacity there. And the benchmark for there is it depends on the age, but let's say between 20, 25 or 30, I think it's of age, it's 30 reps is something to hit for. I think that's really an important one, especially when you're track and field or when you're team sports athletes, running based athletes. The goals has to have the strength. So that's the isometric stuff. And then you have the work capacity as well. You have to have both basically. And then further on, when I do the strength training, from some point on, you're going to test jumping capacity as well. And then for me, RSI is a really, really important one. It's more like an overall metric for me, in which you get a lot of information. And RSI, depending on if you test it with a repeated jump test or with a drop jump, there is a difference. But for me, a good score and a good average score is everything between, let's say, 2.0, 2.5 for a more general perspective. It can be a little bit higher when you're dealing with track and field athletes. They tend to have higher RSI scores. If compared to team sport athletes, they're a little bit lower. But that's for me a good benchmark, in which we have a nice index of reactivity, so they can start running, for example. But looking at the RSI by themselves is not enough for me. So I look down, how is their jump height, how is their ground contact time? And if we see that ground contact time is really high, let's say above 250 milliseconds, then they're good concentrically, but not reactively. So it's a good first to look metric, but then you have to dig deeper, and then you have to decide, are they ready to run? maybe on a lower pace, but are they ready to sprint? Not at all. So they need to work on their reactive capacity and trying to hold their concentric capacity with the concentric work, but try to do it in a shorter time frame. So that's from an RSI and jumping perspective.
Could I ask you, just for the listeners or the physios that have not worked with the RSI, which is the reactive strength index, to what is this metric and how you measure it? Yeah.
So the RSI is a ratio between, depending which ratio you use, but basically jump height compares to ground contact time. So in general terms, it looks how high you can jump, see how many time you have to take for that. So you want to have like a really nice compromise in which you jump as high as possible with the least amount of time possible. And for me, the time variable is really important because that's for me the most important part that gives you like an indication how reactive they are. So the jump height gives you an idea of how strong they are. So it's like their ceiling basically. But how much of that ceiling can they use within like time frames that are really resembling their sport specific time frames? So you can be really, really strong, like have good maximal isometric strength, run around strength, good squat jump capacity. But if you are slower, if you have to take more time compared to an athlete who jumps a little bit less high, but do it in a proper of quicker time frame, then within a sport specific context, the better athlete will be the one who can produce force quicker. So basically RSI gives you like an overall score with that, but you have to dig deeper. So you have your RSI, it gives you like a first glimpse. Okay, you have some frames, 2.0, 2.5 for the average team player, a team sport athlete, more 2.5, 3.0 and higher, going to up to 4.0 maybe for the track and field athletes. It gives you like, is there smoking gun maybe? If it's out of that range, then you know, okay, we need to work both on the concentric stuff and the reactive stuff. If it's good, then you have to dig deeper. Look, okay, jump heights, quite nice, but their ground contact times is way too long. Or it can be other way around as well. So it depends. It gives you like to which way I have to divert my rehab. Do I need to have to the concentric work, some more power work, working on like squat jumps, or really the ballistic work, or need to be more like reactive stuff that can be power jumps, can be drop jumps. Either way, they have to work more on attendance stiffness maybe. So isometric work for me is really a nice way to work on that as well. So it's really for me the first to look at metric when we do jump testing, and then you can dig deeper. So we start with that, and then you dig deeper to look at jump height or fly times. Depends on which ratio you use. And ground contact times is then to see if it's more reactive, more ballistic stuff you have to do. Yeah.
Cool. And when you mention smoking gun, what do you mean by that?
Well, you have to have an idea of what's like the benchmarks for the population you're dealing with. So if you have team sport athletes, you have to know, okay, on average, what's the RSI score we are dealing with. If they're way underneath that, you know, okay, we have to do work both in jump height and ground contact time. So it's really, really, really below that, then just you need the work. But if it's within the proper ranges, then you can dig deeper and see, well, okay, do they do it with enough concentric capacity or general strength, and are they reactive enough? So it's more like, can we even further enhance it, and where do we need to focus on? So you can do concentric work again, but especially for like the high level athletes, normally they're doing that stuff for a couple of years. Introducing reactive stuff oftenly can have like the next stimulus to push them even further. And the same is for heavy isometric work. That works really well, especially with not only older athletes, but the older athletes. They're reacting really good on isometric stuff because we're working on the tendon stiffness. So yeah, it's for me, it's like give you an overall picture, and smoking gun is, are they out of range? Are they better than average? And then you can dig deeper. But it gives you like a rough guideline to look at other metrics, because sometimes it can be overwhelming, especially when you have the luck to have force plates. You get a lot of data, And it's okay, let's first look at the RSI, and then you can dig deeper when you're using Reneasy. There's less data there. It's more comprehensive, but even then I look first at RSI and then I look at the rest to get, like, for me, like a decision tree in my head to, and also to get it explained to the athletes and to my patients. So, that's how I work.
Yeah, interesting. It sounds like you found a kind of a good algorithm or a good testing algorithm there, in a sense, to say, okay, what's what we would call maybe a hero metric that you look at first. And it seems that you've defined that as your RSI. And based on that criteria, if I hear correctly, you then say, okay, well, if we want to dig deeper based on what we see in the RSI, the time component, the flight time and the ground contact time, which component there, or the jump height, should I say, is where it needs to go deeper in. And then if you see certain below criteria for that benchmark population, you might look further into a secondary or a third metric.
Yeah, correct.
What would you maybe look at if you need to look deeper into a specific case? Say it's a basketball player with a low RSI index relative to the benchmarks. And what other things might you be looking at going deeper?
Well, if they have a low RSI, for me, besides the isometric, if you do like isometric stuff of isometric testing, it's not only their peak value that's important for me. More importantly, it's the RFD. So having an idea of the rate of force development, especially in the first 100 milliseconds, is quite important. Once again, when you're on the pitch, on the court, you don't have that much time. So you have constrained time frame in which you have to produce as much force as possible. So once again, they can be really strong, but if they take too much time, then you're second on the ball, you're second on the rebounds, and it can have some really implications when it's a close game, for example. And so that's really the next step. So you look at RSI, you have an idea, jump height, ground contact time. Let's say the ground contact time is way too long. Plyometric stuff, reactive stuff can be in place, but as I said before, isometric work as well. And then we look if we have done some testing, for example, the seated contact time, but also there is one of those. I don't think there are, once again, that feeling you have, okay, that can be a little bit, even if you have to compare it with other teammates, or you have like a rough idea of the look of the shape of the curve. If you're force plates, the curve has to be like this and not like that. Also cueing and feedback is, it has to be sharp and tall, depending on the cueing you give. So if you want the RFD in place, then you really have to cue that you want to see the sharp and tall. So it all depends how you cue. If you don't cue it correctly, then you may not expect that the athlete knows what to do. So if your cueing is in place, then you have to see the curve being sharp and tall. And then you can take the numbers. So to see, okay, that's your peak RFD at 100 milliseconds right there. We see if we can push it. And then you're going like for isometric stuff, like a pushing isometric, in which you try to push something. I think it's calling, is it yielding over? I think it's overcoming isometrics. It's they're switched in between, but the pushing, you push against something that's not movable, like a sitting calf raise or like standing calf raise. You can do it as well with the squats, depending on in which kind of movement you're looking at. And then, if possible, try to have like feedback in place. So if you have force plates, and we're lucky to have them quite recently, so we're gonna use them repeatedly for feedback loops to see, okay, we have to have boom, 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 and really see that we always have like the sharp and tall curve going on. If you don't have that, because it's like in sweet spot when you have force plates, if you don't have force plates, then cueing is everything, and you really have to stand beside it, and then go, and losing it. So like 5 seconds, go, and then losing it. For example, so you really have to push them, and they really have to push all the way through, because you can push at the beginning and then go a little bit sloppy, but they really have to try to push all the way through, and it has to be heavy. It's really taxating on your neural system. It has to be fatiguing after 5 reps, 5 seconds. They really are fatigued, but it's neuromuscular fatigue. It's not physical. It's not metabolically. It's like the nerves are wearing down. Then you rest, but they're really quite. It's acute fatigue. So they when they rest, they it recovers very quickly. But it's very taxating on neuromuscular stuff, but it has to be intention 100%. So that's really important. You have to be quiet with your RPE. It has to be peaking like 7, 8 out of 10. And if you have the force plates in place, you can have the feedback. But the RPE is one of my go-to my go-to feedback loops as well, to see, okay, try to push yourself that you're in like 5 seconds, you're done with it. You have to be relieved after 5 seconds. And then once again and again and again. And then we combine it. You can combine it with some more dynamic stuff to do some plyos, depending on the player's position they're in. So if they're more like over there a runner, you're more like in an extended position. If you are more like a big guy in basketball, they're more starting from a flex position. You can have the same movement pattern in place. You do like, for example, the drop jump or depth jump, or like some deep tiers plyo stuff, but more dynamically to get the muscle stiffness going on. And then with the iso work, you're working more with the tendon stiffness, with the plyos more with the muscle stiffness, and the combination of two let them enhance your elasticity, and hopefully with that reducing ground contact times within proper limits. More or less, that's how we work. So we contrasting a lot of the stuff. So that's how I like to work, doing all those things, some max strength, some iso work, some plyos. I try to combine it in a contrast training way of work, depending on the stage or depending on the athletes. But that's how I like to work, basically. So RFD, that's a really important one for me.
And when it comes to we talk about jumping. When you progress to, say, the other phases of rehab, and you also mentioned biomechanics, what do you use, or what metrics do you use when you go towards running, and whether it's inside the clinic or outside the clinic? Yeah.
So the criteria for running, it's the max iso strength for the calves. So it has to be in place 1.5, 2.0 body weight isometrically, from an RSI. From a limb symmetry index, once again for ACL, for examples, within at least 70% or 80%, they have to be jumping. They have to be ready. So we have to do repeated jump testing, and there an RSI for at least 2.0 to have one benchmark, but they have to be able for work capacity to get like a 10 of 5 test single leg. They have to endure it without any pain. So really the pain is really one of the most important things. And with no pain, there's nothing higher than 2 out of 10. From a biomechanics standpoint of view, single leg calf raise 15 times with a proper alignment of the knee is an important one. The single leg glute bridge as well for the posterior chain work capacity is an important one, so they can hold the rhythm. And then when we do the running, we start running, we do also an assessment in Run Easy to see how the impact is going, and that's mainly the thing I decide if you can bring up the volume. If not, so we're looking at the peak impact, the impact magnitude, impact absorption, see if that's in place, if there are dynamic stability is in order, because once again, when you do stuff like a single like squats, it gives you like a smoking gun. But then you have to see if they're both pelvic dropping or they have not enough strength in their glutes, the 35% body weight. And you have to see it in the running mechanics as well. So I think there's a nice paper of Brahma, I think, who looked at a lot of runners, and
I think it's Chris Brahma. Yeah?
Chris Brahma, yeah. And I think they stated that every 1% increase in pelvic drop increases significantly the odds of being classified as injured. And it was for ITB, patellofemoral pain, Achilles tendon as well, I think, and some MTSS stuff. So for me, on a whole, pelvic drop is one we don't want to see. It's intuitive to think about that. That's making sense. But either way, it's backed by science, and you can have a trunk tray that has to be quite controllable as well. And you have the dynamic stability metric from Renesi, who gives you like a nice framework for that. So you can just look at the coloring core scores, and if it's all within the greenish area or even a little bit, for me, that's okay. We have to work, but you can start running if your impact absorption, if your impact loading is in order. So if your impact is shitty, then that's my experience, then your strength screening and capacity screening will be not good as well. But sometimes you have like the not matching stuff, and then we need to think further. But that's basically what refers to. We do like the strength testing, capacity testing, motor control testing, like single leg calf raise or stuff like that. We have jumping capacity, RSI score is really important to track. And then we do the running mechanics stuff with Renisi and we film it to have to see what happens. We're not measuring angles per se.
Mm-hmm.
Not consistently, but we're looking for like a bird eye view, and then we're looking at the data from Renisi to get like a deeper picture. And if impact absorption is okay, and impact magnitude is controllable, and dynamic stability is not too off limits, then they can start running. But if impact absorption is not in order, then they're not clear to run, because there's too much of a risk to develop secondary injuries like patellofemoral but most importantly, the patellofemoral pain. The anterior knee pain is one of the things that's it's one of the biggest risks to get, especially after ACL. It's my experience. That's how we work in a nutshell. And maybe as a side note, the calves and the ankle, that's really important. Also, ankle mobility. We test it, because we need to wall test to get a left to right difference, and also injury history to see, okay, do you have a lot of ankle distortion in the past? That's really nothing I go light on. So it's really important for me. And sometimes, really often, it's missed if you ask for like, which kind of injury did you have?
Yeah, right.
Nothing major. And you really have to ask, and what about your ankles? Oh, my ankles are 3 to 4 times a season. But it's nothing to worry about. It is. But you really have to ask particularly for the ankle. And that's because the ankle for me is like, if I have to choose one particular joint that it's overall important, running base, change direction, and gun to my head, I would say the ankle. It's not black and white, but the ankle has to be strong. Sloppy ankles doesn't sound that good for change of direction, and especially not sprinting and going for a run for like 2 hours or something like that. So yeah, sloppy ankles is a no-go for every injury for me. So that's important.
It sounds like you're striking a good balance between clinical reasoning and data and using technology. And I think if you look at how things are evolving with the availability of new technologies and thinking towards the future, what do you think are the biggest factors or criteria about working technology into your workflows and into your clinical reasoning process?
Yeah, I think the next step is getting more like things like force plates or Renisi really integrated into daily practice. You have like a clear understanding of the ground reaction forces going on, how many forces are produced, get an idea of the reactive stuff like RSI or RFD. So really get that into place, because a lot of research is really, really stating that the RD stuff, being reactive, being quick in strength, in building up strength and forces is really important, but it's not easy to assess. If there's developing tools that it's getting more integrated into daily practice, that will be of importance. And then combining that with kinematic analysis. And there's something going on markerless motion analysis. And I think that integrating that with data, more kinetic data from Renisi or force plates or what have you, will be the next big thing. So you get like a comprehensive picture of what are they doing and how are they doing it. Because looking at one thing only, it doesn't give you like the whole picture.
Yeah.
So looking only at kinematics, okay, maybe they're pelvic dropping. It could be, but you have to know how is their strength. So is their strength enough? Is their RFC enough? Okay, then they can have a pelvic drop, but it's okay, but it's controllable. The same for like overpronation and some stuff like that. Is it okay? Well, it depends if they can control it. So you have your kinematic data, then you're going to have to look at your kinetics and your strength assessment. So it's really trying to integrate it all. But let's say the first step is to get really nice, intuitive tools that get you the kinetics. And then you can combine it with kinematics either via markerless motion analysis or just filming it and do like basic drawings with Kinovea or stuff like that to get like a broad picture of it. But I like data, I like precise data, and I only use stuff that's validated or reliable, backed by science if possible. If it's not, then I just use my phone to look and try to comprehend it and don't always use common sense. And does it even matter? That's the second question I ask myself. Does it matter? So, and to get a real nice answer to that, I need to have data that is validated and reliable. So yeah, so the combination of kinetics, kinematics in an easy to use tool will be the next step. And yeah, just get a good knowledge base of what's coherent reaction forces, what's RFD, what's RSI. So really have a clear understanding of what that is. That's maybe the most important thing. Just the physio has to be strength and conditioning knowledge. Even if you're working with athletes, if you're working with patients from all levels and they do sports and change of direction sports, running sports, there are really important criteria. So you need to know what they are, how you can train it. And if you don't have the tools to assess them, you really have to good knowledge of what they have to deal with when they're doing their sports. And if you have that knowledge, you can do a good job. Maybe you can't assess it, but you're doing a good job as well. And if you're doing that, athletes, try to have the tools that you can assess it. So it's really a good investment to have handheld dynamometers who give you like RFD indications to run or to use force plates or some kind of that. So it's really like the investment that's have a good return of investment as well, because it gives you like good data that is important, backed by research. So yeah, it gives you a good guideline for your rehab. So yeah, that should be the next thing, I think.
Yeah, I can see, and also also knowing you for the last few years, being one of the innovators, early adopters of technology, and building that, accumulating that experience of how to implement, how to use data and metrics into shaping your rehabilitation protocols, your strength and conditioning. It's really nice to see how that's evolved, and we can only commend you on how you've evolved that and leading that a lot of those pathways and frameworks. Let's maybe end off with some rapid fire questions. What would be, if you have to select, what would be your go-to strength exercise? If you had one or two, yeah.
Go-to strength exercise. Okay. If you from a local, I'm gonna complicate the answer. From a local perspective, seated calf raise. If I have to have one, seated calf raise, nice soleus work, sloppy ankles there.
No sloppy ankles. I love that.
Also the seated calf raise for the ankle, for the soleus, and then the hamstrings for me also important. Single leg RDL to get a little bit more complexity and get posterior chain work going on. So that are my, if I have to pick two. So seated calf raise for the soleus and single leg RDL for the whole posterior chain. If you make it more difficult and have to say only one, then I will say everything with rhythm, like skips or progos, because then you have both of two worlds. So yeah, so the rhythm, getting everything integrated. Yeah, that's, if you have to pick one, I think that's the one I would choose. Pogo jumps, skips, everything with some rhythm in it, and just feel the movement and feel the burn maybe as well in the calf muscles or in your glutes or in your hamstrings, whatever.
Yeah.
That will be, maybe that will be my go-to. But I can answer shortly. That's not in my nature. But yeah,
I know it's a tough question.
It's a tough question, but seated calf raise, single RDL, and hops.
Yeah,
that's it. History.
For sure, the hops bring elements of specificity, coordination, and complexity as well.
Yeah, and it's one of the most sensitive assessments post ACL based on the work of Espetar. So if it's important to assess, it's also a good exercise. Single leg hopping. So yeah, let's go for that. Single leg hopping.
Excellent. All right. Question 2 of 3. What is a must-read book or paper that you would recommend for clinicians?
Well, paper-wise, I love the work of Manny Guccia and his work at Centrum Sports. So it's more sprint related. And really, with the practical recommendations as well. So one of the most reads is their paper in which they're asking, can we change maximal sprinting posture? And we can. We can do it multifactorially, and it has implications for hamstring injury. So many good job for the sprinting and lacking for everything core related. It's really nice. And if you want to dig deeper into the biomechanics from sprinting, GB Morin, I can pronounce correctly, but that's right. For me, it all started with his research on biomechanics and sprinting. And then when you look at change of direction, stuff from Dos Santos and their work there's a site, multi-directional speed science, I think it's called. They have like a nice size site in which they group all of their research. So it's really nice to have a look at that. And when you're working with deceleration athletes or change of direction athletes, then the work of Damien Harper is really nice to look at. Also more from biomechanical stuff, but they have also some really elaborate reviews to get the practical translation, so exercise-wise, etc. And then from a book, if you want to question everything, then you have to read Franz Bosch's books. It's quite complex. It's not that easy to digest from the beginning, but it triggers you. It triggered me to rethink and to see, okay, where do I fit it in? Because it's like, for me, what he's saying, and especially when you look at his course, it's like a little bit elephant in the room. So it's just like, it's really maybe principle in his ideas, but I like their ideas, but I have placed it within a broader context. So at the beginning, I was like all hyped with complexity and it has to be specific and sport specific, but after some time you get it has its places, but it's one piece of the puzzle. So the papers I mentioned, quite nice for Bosch is to get, if you have like a solid base of the basic stuff of strength and conditioning, so know the stuff and you want to be triggered, then that's my go-to. And to have an overall picture, advanced strength and conditioning from, I think, Anthony Turner. It's like a book getting like a bird's eye view of everything related to strength and conditioning, especially for the physios who are not really into strength and conditioning, but wants to. Gives you like a nice overview of relevant topics.
Fantastic resources and recommendations. Thanks for sharing that. Great. Just bringing to a closing, where can our listeners get in touch with you if they want to hear more about the ways where you integrate data and do your work? I know you also do some courses. Where could they reach out to you?
Sometimes I post on Instagram if we do, for example, the screenings with basketball with Leather Bears, or we have some patients we can track. Sometimes they post themselves, but if we do some screenings, I post something with some making a case study out of it. So Instagram you can take a look at, but I'm not that active. I'm more a passive user, let's say, but if it's an interesting course or during the season, sometimes I post something. Maybe you guys, your channels, for a blog or something like that. If there is interest, I read something, a case study. So I had some course, the course with Smart Education, but there's no new course planned for the moment. So Instagram, I would say, and look at the stories from both me as Love Bears or the place I work, the Move Spectac. There we play sometimes some cool stuff or some interesting stuff to look at. So that will be it. And otherwise, you can send me an email if you have questions at Joachim@makeamove.be. You can always send me an email if you have some questions. I'm happy to answer it or to have a call of a chat if you want. But Instagram will be the most easy to access, I think.
Fantastic. And your Instagram handle is your name, right? It's Joachim Boon.
Yeah, it's Joachim Boon, just that of the Move Spectacular Bears. There we will post some stuff during the season.
Awesome. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. I know you've got a lineup of patients and athletes today, you're giving up your lunch break. We really appreciate you sharing your insights on the Physio Insights podcast. And have a great summer vacation and keep in touch.
Thank you. Cheers.
That's it for today on the Physio Insights podcast by Run Easy. Would you like to share an interesting case, insight, or thought about this episode? Comment below and don't forget to follow us for more episodes.